and begin. So I am so happy you're all here today. So Katie is my guest and colleague, and she's here to talk about neurodivergence. And one of the ways that this has come up is that I was late diagnosed with ADD, like in my mid 40s. And my daughter was diagnosed with autism in their mid 30s. And most of the people that I work with who are entrepreneurs have reported having patterns of behavior that mirror the diagnosis of being neurodivergent. And I think that that's very interesting as someone who coaches entrepreneurs to see where it is that we all struggle. And so Nick, my daughter, had requested that I do more work around entrepreneurialism and neurodivergence. And that's how this got born. And Katie was introduced to me by one of my clients who was raving about how you've been helping. And I am so delighted that you're here and would love to hear more about your story. How did you get here? And also to give all of you as much useful content as possible. Katie is just a deep source. She's a deep source for information here. There will be time for question and answers afterwards. And I just kind of want to dive in and have you take the reins and just let us know who you are and dive into your presentation.
Thank you. Let me screen share. And if there are any other tech issues, please let me know. Let me close the various windows that I have. Is everyone able to see okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I have a clock. It's going to tell me the time. It's going to go off every 15 minutes or so. I've done this presentation once before and I kind of lost track of time. So this will help me. I'll try and keep it 45 minutes-ish. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. That way you can put it out there, focus, keep moving. Um, and this is my suggested route. So it'll be 45-minute presentation-ish about me, about neurodiversity, about medical model, neurodivergence, mental health, ADHD, ASD, covering a lot. So text heavy slides because I know people learn differently. Because of that, I'll be reading some of it, talking off the cuff for some of it. The slides will be there in the recording and for you to take a look at while we talk. The presentation is for informational purposes only. It's general in nature and it is not medical advice. So all of it is general. If you have specific questions for me about your circumstances, you're welcome to schedule a consult with me. Happy to talk about this, love talking about this. And my invitation is to, within reason, do what you need to do in order to be present and engaged. So for this section, at least, if you need to turn your camera off, go ahead. If you need to do vinyasa yoga poses, do that with your camera off, please. Keep your audio muted if possible. And I can't see your lovely faces while I'm presenting. So if there's something, Penelope, somebody needs me to know, then please say it because I won't be able to hear it. So I'm counting on you, Penelope, to kind of monitor that.
On it.
Right. Thank you. All right, let's talk about me. I think who I am and what my experience is very much impacts the work that I do and the things that I say. So in 2011, I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychotherapy, Mindfulness, and Creative Expression from the University of Redlands in Redlands, California. That is east of LA, but close to LA. In 2015, I balanced out that perspective by graduating with a master's in mental health counseling and behavioral medicine from Boston University School of Medicine in Boston, Massachusetts. During that graduate school program, I did a summer internship doing crisis assessment in a mobile unit, being sent out into the Boston community when folks were having psychiatric or substance use crises. And for the second year of the master's program, I did an internship in residential substance abuse treatment at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Jamaica Plain, Boston area. So that was all male vets, PTSD, depression, anxiety, um, residential substance use. After that, from 2015 to 2017, I worked full time as a counselor in a methadone clinic in Boston. So that was everyone was opiate dependent, methadone treatment, also cocaine use, alcohol use, THC use, in addition to mental health. So anxiety, depression, trauma, bipolar personality disorders, you name it. Then I moved to Seattle and completely different group of people. Since 2018, I've been working in private practice based in Seattle. Started out seeing substance use, depression, anxiety, trauma, that piece. Ended up unintentionally um, not pushing, unintentionally specializing in neurodivergence without my knowledge, which I discovered when I started my own neurodivergent path. So at this point, I have an ADHD, autism, nonverbal learning disability trifecta of neurodivergence. And those were identified after schooling, after starting a private practice, after living with many years of mental health conditions. So this is what I specialize in now. Um, I'm living in Burlington, Vermont, and I'm licensed in Vermont as a therapist too. So I see clients mostly in Seattle, but also licensed in Washington or Vermont. So this will all weave in. When you have questions for me, feel free to ask about my personal experience, my professional experience. Nothing about politics or religion, please. But other than that, if it's a question I'm uncomfortable with, I'll just not answer it or half answer it. Neurodivergence. Neurodivergence terms are important to me, and understanding having us all speak a language that has a common foundation. So, neurodiversity is simply the natural variety of the human brain and how it works. So, everybody is on the neurodiversity spectrum. Even if you're not neurodivergent, you are on this spectrum, which is how the human brain varies. It's about biological reality. It's not an opinion. It's not a belief system. It's not a political stance. It's just like how height has a bell curve and a spectrum, so do our brains. Neurodiversity paradigm and neurodiversity movement are two different things, but connected. The paradigm is a way of thinking that provides the foundation for the activism that is typically part of the neurodiversity movement. And that's philosophy and movement. So the paradigm has three core principles, and you'll see these woven throughout this presentation. The first one is that variation in how our brains work is normal. It's not healthy or unhealthy, it's just a thing. There is no, and the second point is there is no single normal brain. A brain comes in contact with an environment and with situations, and that's where normal or unhealthy can come about. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. The third piece is that neurodivergence, just like any other difference that we see in society, reflects privilege and oppression and those social dynamics that is also in play when we talk about neurodivergence. So that's another piece you'll see woven throughout this presentation. The term neurodivergent means having a brain that works differently than what society typically considers standard. So if you think about a kid, when they're getting measured for height, it typically falls on a bell curve where you have the middle portion where most people are. That's That's standard. And then you have the wings that are less standard. So neurodivergence can be a little bit like that, in that someone who's neurodivergent has a brain that works differently. Neurotypical means that your brain function aligns with what's expected by society. Very few people's actually does, because if you get down into the details, there's so many nuances in how the brain works that most people are varied somewhere. Being neurodivergent isn't good or bad. It's just a thing. It really depends on the specific differences as well as how they affect the individual, how they affect your life, what you feel about it, what your family feels about it. Neurodivergence in the medical model. When you look up neurodivergence, when you look up ADHD, when you look up autism, you're going to run into the medical model. The DSM, which I was going to grab, but I don't have on me, is this really big, thick book. And it's the official handbook that the US uses, at least. There's another one that's international that is very closely aligned, but we use the ICD-10 and the DSM-5 to diagnose mental health conditions. And neurodivergence is neurodevelopmental disorders are considered mental health conditions. The most recent version came out in 2013, which is a fair amount of time ago. The DSM uses standardized checklists to determine if someone meets the criteria for a diagnosis. There are problems with that. It comes with very particular biases, but we need something. So it measures whether particular symptoms, cause what we call significant distress to the individual and problems in daily life. And these are two things you're going to hear a lot: significant distress and problems in daily life. So you can't just have the symptoms, they also have to have those two things as evaluated against typical functioning expectations. So all of the mental health conditions, by the way, when they're being assessed, they are assessed against neurotypical functioning. So we'll circle back to that one, because many people who are diagnosing mental health conditions, including primary cares and mental health professionals like me, are not trained appropriately to assess neurodivergence, and therefore may not be giving you an accurate or useful or socially just, really, diagnosis. The DSM system focuses on problems and deficits rather than strengths and challenges. And part of that is because it was created in many ways to be a billing document so that we can bill insurance and so that we can do research, which is one of the reasons why it's a standardized checklist. So it doesn't map onto human 3D people very well. It typically gives a yes or no answer. You have it or you don't. There are things called subclinical or traits of, but many therapists or professionals aren't going to diagnose that necessarily. You run into it with autism and ADHD. So that's where you end up with like autism traits, ADHD traits. This looks like autism. This looks like ADHD. So you end up with it more in neurodivergence. Diagnosis quality varies significantly based on the clinician's training and experience. So we'll talk about that one, but that's where my passion for this is, to try and level the playing field a little bit. Neurodevelopmental disorders, autism, ADHD, and the other ones we're going to talk about, impact the way your brain develops and functions. Some people will say, I've heard people say, doesn't that mean your brain is broken? It doesn't. It means your brain operates differently and needs different things. In this realm of disorders, it starts your brain and the way you interpret, understand, communicate, make sense of the world starts changing before you're 18, which is why they're developmental disorders, because they start before your body and your brain is fully developed. They often run in families, they're highly genetic. So if a kid has one, a parent probably does, or at least subclinical traits of. If a parent has one, the kid's probably going to have some somewhere. In the DSM, you have 6 neurodevelopmental disorders: ADHD, autism, learning disorders, intellectual developmental disorder, communication disorders, movement and motor disorders. The two we're going to focus on in a little bit down the road is ADHD and autism, because those are the ones that pop up the most, or at least I get the most questions about. Mental health. So this slide and the next slide I put together from my own experience of tying together neurodivergence, mental health, substance use, social issues, relationship issues. And then following this, we're going to have a couple slides that are stats to give more of a meta perspective. My alarm's also going to go off in like a minute and a half to give those of you who get startled that knowledge. Once again, neurodivergence is a neutral brain variation. Challenges often arise when the environments and the systems surrounding the person are only designed for neurotypical people. This creates a mismatch, and it also creates confusion and misunderstanding in terms of what can be expected and what's needed. So the DSM, to go back to definitions, because those are important to me at least, and I think we don't talk about them enough. Mental health conditions are disorders that deviate from normal, once again, that normal functioning, and require clinical treatment to reduce the symptoms and improve how someone functions in daily life. So even in that sentence, you have, this is not just a set of symptoms, this is how a set of symptoms causes distress to the individual and how it impacts significant areas like work, relationships, and daily activities. It also, for each of these disorders, there's a set amount of time it needs to continue for in order to get a diagnosis. So major depression, for instance, set of symptoms, have to have them for at least 2 weeks. Different kind of depression has a different set of symptoms that you have to have for 2 years. So when someone says depression, it doesn't actually mean anything, which is why I always ask people what they mean with their terms. When someone says they have anxiety, what does that mean? How does that affect you? The other piece about mental health conditions is that they need to not be better explained by cultural differences, substance use, or medical issues. So culture is a huge piece, asking people to tell you about their culture, to explain, to elaborate, and also please get medical tests. Get your blood work done. If you have sleep issues, talk to a sleep doctor. It's a lot easier and less expensive to go get blood work done and find out you have a thyroid condition, for instance, than to go to 10 years of therapy and find out that your depression is actually a thyroid issue. Sleep apnea looks almost exactly, untreated sleep apnea looks almost exactly like ADHD. So please go talk to doctors too, and hopefully work with a mental health person who can help sort that out. Mental health stuff comes hand in hand with neurodivergence. I haven't met a single person who doesn't have a history of mental health conditions if they're neurodivergent. I have met people who are neurodivergent or do have neurodevelopmental disorders, but do not have mental health conditions presently. So it is possible. But for neurodivergent folks, anxiety, depression, PTSD, really, really common, frequently developing from chronic stress, trying to fit into systems that aren't built for us. Also, a lack of understanding and a lack of a supportive community can cause mental health conditions and environmental demands that don't match how our brains work. For instance, open office designs, for those of you in offices, if you process sounds differently or have a slower processing speed, that stuff can wreck that, for example, can wreck your productivity and can put you on um, track to be fired. So we'll talk about accommodations, which is really just flexibility, but mental health conditions come hand in hand with neurodivergence when systems, environments, communities are not set up to account for flexibility. With proper support and flexibility, many comorbid, and comorbid just means you have two medical conditions happening at the same time. So, mental health, if you have depression and anxiety, that's comorbid conditions. ADHD, depression, comorbid conditions. So, if you have support and a flexibility and, coaching, aid, fill in the blank, many medical conditions will not develop. So, education, big piece of this. For neurodivergent people, substance use, especially alcohol and marijuana, really common. Behavioral problems, really common. Behavioral problems can be as benign as problematic shopping. It can be as benign as video games. It can be benign as scrolling on social media. So it's not the behavior that's the problem, it's the frequency, the intensity, the problem. But the substance use and the actions we as neurodivergent people frequently take, they can emerge as coping mechanisms for brain-based differences and for social and emotional challenges. So this can be ways of coping with overwhelming sensory or social environments. So I would listen to podcasts on the T on the subway. And that was my way of dealing with overwhelming sensory stuff. Substance use and problematic behaviors can also be responses to chronic rejection, misunderstanding, or masking. Masking exhaustion, which we'll talk about, looks like burnout. It also looks like meltdowns or extreme emotionality. It can look like tiredness, physical tiredness. It can look like many things. I've also seen people develop suicidal actions or reactions in response to extreme emotions from feeling rejected or feeling misunderstood. So, personality disorders frequently will also get misdiagnosed um, when there's a neurodivergence piece instead of or in addition to. Legal and social difficulties. Oh, self regulation. Attempts to self regulate when appropriate supports aren't available. I know a lot of people who drink in social situations to manage the anxiety in social situations. And I know a lot of people who smoke marijuana to regulate a nervous system that's really overwhelmed, either from ADHD or from autism. Legal and social difficulties often are somewhere in someone's background, frequently from missed flexibility, from misunderstandings between authority figures and neurodivergent folks because we express emotions differently and our behaviors don't look always like someone who's neurotypical. So police, parents, teachers will frequently misunderstand what's happening and then punish us. Systems that penalize differences. It it's a whole thing. And all of this as entrepreneurs or as parents or as teachers, all of this is all around your life. It just happens to be blended in a way that's hard to pull apart sometimes. So one of my goals when talking to people is to try and shift them from fixing people, fixing problems, to creating environments where differences can thrive, or at least be accounted for and treated with kindness and curiosity. I'm going to talk about stats for a few minutes. Stats, numbers can be deceiving. When you're given stats, it's always important to know where they come from and how big the sample size was, like how many people were in this study, who did this study, where's the funding for the study from. But that aside, we're going to talk about some stats to just give a picture of what a possible neurodivergent life can be. This is the strengths side. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds-ish, I'll watch my clock to take a look at this slide. Um, Innovation, creativity, pattern recognition, hyperfocus, entrepreneurship, specialized knowledge, resilience, diverse thinking. A lot of these stats from these research studies are, 30% higher, 40% higher, twice as fast, stronger coping mechanisms. So I'll give you, 10 seconds to take a look at this. And this will also be available in the recording, but you have a picture here of a lot of successful entrepreneurs, really, and a lot of successful folks in their personal life or in their professional life. A lot that can be offered to our communities and to our families. Not fun part. Um, Sample stats, 50 to 70% of people with one neurodevelopmental variation have at least another one, which is where my ADHD, autism, and VLD picture really isn't as abnormal as people think it is. Um, Not everyone needs to know where their traits are from and what is intersecting with what. I like it. I like knowing. I like puzzles. So, not all that unusual. 70 to 80% of neurodivergent adults develop mental health conditions. I'm not surprised it's higher. 20 to 30% of adults seeking support for substance use are suspected to have ADHD, and about 5 to 10% are suspected to have autism. Among adolescents in treatment programs, 30 to 50% are suspected to be neurodivergent. And many of these substance use treatment facilities um, I haven't found a neurodivergent focused residential program really. I find neurodivergence informed ones, but it's this secret hidden thing that is being popped up everywhere, but no one's really talking about. Neurodivergent individuals are 2 to 7 times more likely to be victims than perpetrators of crime. That goes back to that difference in how we express things and throw in things like race and class and gender, and it gets more complicated. Our interactions with police are more likely to cause negative outcomes due to differences in communication, as well as the assumptions that are put on us. 25 to 45% of incarcerated adults are suspected to have unidentified or unsupported ADHD, and that's partly due to the impulsivity factor that we'll talk about, compared to about 4 to 5% of people in the general population in the US are suspected to have ADHD. But many who are incarcerated also have ADHD, as well as other variables that make it more or less likely to be incarcerated. 10 to 15% of individuals in the justice system may have unrecognized autism. Divorce rates. For couples where one partner is neurodivergent, this was a smaller study, but it kind of reflects what I've seen. 58 to 80% likely to get a divorce when one person has a neurodivergent mind if supports are not in place and education is not in place. But if you educate people and give them a diagnosis, the satisfaction in a marriage based on these studies I was finding goes up by about 70%. High school dropout rate, 2 to 3 times higher for unidentified neurodivergent students. College completion rates, 30 to 45% lower for folks without accommodations. So this is a really, really sad, horrible picture. Um, and a lot of this is about lack of accommodations and lack of knowledge, um, and people not communicating. So this is why I do this presentation that I do. Let's talk about ADHD and autism. We have 17 minutes-ish. ADHD. The DSM lists 18 symptoms of ADHD. This is the stuff you will find if you Google ADHD. 3 subtypes: inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive, and combined. They are outdated, very narrowly defined criteria. They were developed between the 1940s and 2013 to describe what medical people in a laboratory were seeing of kids between the ages of 6 and 12 who were white, middle class male kids without any mental health or other variables like other neurodivergences. That doesn't exist really. But that is what you are going to find in all the articles and on all the websites about ADHD, which is why you also can't just have what we have, which is 1 week of training in master's programs and frequently no training in primary care about how to assess or recognize or treat this. The criteria for people who are older than 12 and especially older than 17 doesn't come from research with those people. It comes from what they took the kid studies of and played out and extrapolated. This is well known among people who study this and research this. The focus is on symptom management through medication and behavioral interventions. The emphasis is on helping people to have less distress and to function better within the systems that they're in. Growing body of research and specialists, as well as neurodivergent practitioners and individuals, are saying this is bullshit. Um, Social media can be a good thing for this. There's a lot of anger about this. And frequently, it's the neurodivergent individual who goes to their providers and has to do most of the educating of the providers, which is a problem. The things that are missing, and there is a movement and there is work to update the criteria. So if you're mad about this, great. We are working on it, I swear. Executive functioning issues and emotional dysregulation are nowhere in the DSM criteria. They're everywhere in the lived experience. Masking and all the things we do to try and seem normal and functional is also not accounted for. And in ADHD, it's less of a lack of attention and more our attention is put in places where other people think it shouldn't be. There are alternative frameworks that when you combine them with the DSM criteria does a better job. One of them is a guy named Dr. William Dodson, who's been a specialist working as a clinician and as a researcher, but mostly as a clinician with ADHD folks for decades. And he wrote a great article. You're going to get a handout, by the way, with here are some resources to read. Here are some people to explore. But he wrote an article that came out, I don't know, 10 years ago that gets refreshed periodically that said, what does everyone with ADHD have in common that people without ADHD don't experience? And this slide is about that. And you're starting to see this make its way into like social media and clinician language. But what you see with ADHD is that focus, attention, and motivation are based on interest, the individual's interest. With someone who's neurotypical, focus, attention, and motivation are importance based, priority based, or time based. So if you're a parent or a leader or a manager and you're working with a neurodivergent person, if you tell them what's important to you, what's your priority, and what needs to happen in what time frame, it's not likely going to happen. If you can figure out where their interest is and how to activate that interest, there's almost nothing someone with ADHD can't do. So interest driven attention is one of the core things you can look for to identify ADHD. Stimulant meds do a really good job, actually, of leveling the playing field, but not everybody wants them or can take them or fill in the blank. So the other side is a new set of rules that teach you how to get engaged on demand or how to redirect. And that's where people like Penelope or therapists like me who do a lot of coaching with therapy come in. Emotional hyperarousal is another piece that folks without ADHD don't have as much of. Really intense shame, really intense low self esteem come hand in hand with ADHD and autism, but ADHD because of the emotionality that comes with it frequently and the disappointing people due to not being able to pay attention to what they think you should. Rejection sensitivity isn't true with everybody, but there is a group of people who, when they perceive criticism um, or when they perceive they've disappointed somebody, will get extreme, extreme, extreme intense emotions. Um, I've seen it be suicidal level. So when you combine like substance use with ADHD, you end up with actions that will frequently put people in prison or in the worst case situation. You know, I've got rejection sensitivity and manage it okay. You'll see it as crying, you'll see it as irritation, you'll see it as um, lots of justification for why you did the thing you did, instead of just taking the feedback, for instance. Alpha agonist blood pressure meds are really the only thing that has been shown to help with that because the reactivity is so fast that mindfulness and coaching helps and alpha agonists help, but it's something that is probably the most debilitating part for the people who have it. Last part about ADHD. It is not a deficit of attention, it is inconsistent attention that is activated under certain circumstances. Interest, momentary interest. So if you're interested in something, your attention will be there, but then you will lose interest. So figuring out how to exercise consistently is going to take knowing this stuff when you're working with someone who has ADHD. Competition can also activate someone's interest. Novelty, things that are new, can activate interest. Urgency, which is do or die deadline, urgency can also be a conflict with a significant other. So people will sometimes pick conflicts or start fights to get up the motivation to do something. So this isn't the what do we do with this part. I'm assuming that's going to be more of the question answer part. This is the here's a bunch of information part. Autism. Autism is conceptualized as a deficit in social communication and restricted repetitive behaviors. That's a whole bunch of clinical language. Um, it's typically, this is DSM again. Focus is typically on early intervention and teaching neurotypical social skills and communication. That's changing, but it's very much about let's teach people how to mask. Increasing prevalence rates due to broadened criteria. So if you look at the 1980s, it was suspected like 1 in 2,000 people had autism. In 2025, a couple months ago, I think, the CDC said 1 in 31, and there's many reasons for that. Um, and ADHD and autism also show up all over the world. These are US stats, but the stats are shockingly similar for wherever you look around the world. So it's not just a US problem. In 2013, the term Asperger's was eliminated, so you won't hear that one anymore. And instead, there was a severity level list that was created based on your support needs. So someone like me, I would have been Asperger's, not low needs support. Really good at masking a lot of my autism stuff looks different than what you would expect for a boy, for instance. So my restricted repetitive interest, for instance, is psychology. I happen to get paid for it. still a special interest. Same deal with ADHD. Criteria are from kids, white, male, upper middle class children, looked at in laboratories by clinicians. In the last 5 years, there's been a lot of advocacy work, a need for adult specific criteria, a focus on what masking can look like. Just because you got a 4.0 in school doesn't mean you don't have autism. Just because you're married doesn't mean you don't have social communication issues that fall under the autism picture. Impact of burnout, huge impact. Sensory experiences are very underrepresented despite being core to the autistic experience. So we'll talk about this in a minute. But in general, ADHD, autism, both of them, DSM in general, the focus is on what you can, what a clinician can see from the outside, and it doesn't account for the inner experience or the voices of the people who live it. Masking, by the way, is just unconscious or conscious covering up of neurodivergent traits, and it's a survival strategy. It's something we learn how to do for love and acceptance and safety, especially if you're a person of color. So, unrecognized, it is autism, ADHD and autism, but especially ADHD. Many stereotypes that mean that people who are female, people who are not white, people who are of different cultures, not saying if you're a white male, you also don't sometimes get miscategorized. But in general, if you're successful in school, if you seem to get along with people, if you look okay, people are going to think you're okay until you hit a point like marriage or retirement or menopause or divorce or COVID, when all of a sudden all the systems you've created go to hell. And then there might be problems. Dr. Devin Price, this is the last thing we're going to talk about. He wrote a book called Unmasking Autism. He wrote a sequel that came out that I haven't read recently. They wrote a sequel. Um, they it's a really amazing book. It's a great book about people who have autism, but it's been masked for a variety of different reasons. And they talk about a couple different categories, and I'm just putting these out for maybe in the future. If you go back and watch this, you can pause it. We have 4 minutes, by the way, and then I'll pause. Um, Sensory processing differences in autism. And autism and ADHD, they're siblings. Frequently, if you have one, you have traits of, if not both. It's just a matter of what intensity, how bad is it, where are the problems. Um, and you can be part of the community of either if you think you do, or if you do, or if you identify with any of this. Um, but sensory processing differences tend to line up more with autism from what I've seen than ADHD. So this is heightened sensitivity to lights, sounds, textures, smells. Sometimes people will seek intense sensations for also, that's also a sensory processing difference. Difficulty in chaotic environments, difficulty filtering clutter is sometimes an autism thing. Social information processing, difficulty understanding the rules and the give and take of social relationships, or you can do it, but it's highly taxing. So sometimes folks who identify as introverts or highly sensitive people might line up more with autism. Intensity and hyperfocus, this one, the difference between ADHD and autism in this can take some communication between you and a specialist to figure out. But the ability to intensely focus on subjects and go deep dive in them for a long time. Strong need to understand systems and patterns. That one is a very autism piece too that you see with engineers, you see with specialists. You'll see it with me in this presentation. Um, Need for predictability. So distress when routines are disrupted. This may look like a full-on emotional meltdown, or it might just look like we were supposed to do this thing. Why didn't we do this thing? And just a difficulty changing gears. Um, and anxiety. The anxiety might be more than a meltdown. Comfort in repetition, need for preparation before transitions, and then you have divergent thinking and identity. So, folks who are neurodivergent typically have a sense of feeling different throughout your life. Um, some people will talk about it as I was an alien on a different planet and now I'm here. Um, I've had other people talk about it like, you're in an environment and people will recognize that there's something slightly off about you, but they won't be able to put their finger on it. Um, in general, just kind of a slight life taking more of a toll than it seems like it does for other people. So, just like with ADHD, autism, not a deficit necessarily. It's a difference in how information is processed and experienced. It just, when it's put in contact with a world that doesn't understand, or in relationships where someone looks at you and they think you're quote unquote normal or know what you're doing and you don't always, it can cause a lot of issues from legal ones to social ones to occupational ones. And as people in the world, as well as parents and teachers and mentors, um, I think we can do better for ourselves and for other people. Thank you. I'm under by 30 seconds. Hi, this is my Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. I have a blog. It's on my Facebook page typically, and I will stop sharing and hand back to Penelope.
Okay, before you stop sharing, go ahead and take
Yes,
a screenshot of that if you guys, and is this information included in your handout so that people can find
yes,
you easily? Excellent.
yes,
So you will get this tomorrow with the
yes.
recording. Katie,
Yay.
thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead and,
Tons of information.
yeah, it's fantastic.
It was fun.
Good. I'm going to be unpacking that for, the next 10 years. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yeah,
Welcome.
seriously. So good. Thank you so much. Um, Questions. I want to give you all an opportunity. I did have a question about the masking, so I'm glad you talked about that a little bit. But I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask some questions because we started late. I'm not going to do the breakout rooms right this
Okay.
minute. But, go ahead and either raise your hand and unmute yourself
You
or
can you can
put it,
handle it if you're willing.
yeah,
You can
yeah.
call on people or say
I will.
questions.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and let you. So I'm just going to jump on in and ask, could you do a little bit more explanation about masking? I hear it a lot. I know. Just would love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. So masking is a lot of these terms don't have specific definitions, which is part of the problem. So masking is anything you do to appear another way.
Mhm.
And it can be depending on the environment you're and what community you're in, it can go under different terms. Um, but me, when I was seeing people in person and I went in business professional clothes and didn't move and sat cross-legged and didn't talk and just asked people how they were feeling, that is masking. Or drinking in order to be more extroverted is masking. Or fiddling with things underneath a screen is masking. Um, and it is a performance that has gaps in it. And so the performance costs a lot. And we're all doing it all the time. And part of what was weird about COVID is people stopped being able to mask. And all of a sudden, things were showing up that were unexpected. So you
Was that
get,
because of the system that we're in? Like I was listening to you saying, at like for retirement, all the systems that we've set up
mhm,
help or shifting anyway, when you're shifting the environment so much.
yeah.
Um, mhm.
And it's it's a little bit tricky because we have to exist within the systems that we live. So being unmasked all the time is also not feasible.
Missy has a question. So go ahead and unmute. Thanks, Missy.
Hi, Katie. I had a question about the idea around the ADHD concept of losing attention and the concept of distractibility. And that's the first time that I've heard of that idea that it's not that you're not paying attention, you just shift it. So, but there is that distractibility which rolls into the autism,
Mhm.
those background noises. So how do you define distractibility? Or is that a misrepresentation of changing your attention?
It's a good question. Um, I also want to say we didn't talk about NVLD. Um,
What's that stuff?
I swear it's related, I promise. So words words really, really matter. And NVLD, nonverbal learning disability, is when your word ability is significantly better than your visual, spatial, anything, which is why I'm obsessed with words. So the reason I bring this up is that distractibility, you need to define it. When I said distractibility, or when you said distractibility, or when a researcher said distractibility, so these words don't mean anything unless you also say whose definition, what is the definition, what exactly are they talking about? So do you mean distractibility as in you, Missy, are supposed to be paying attention to what I'm saying and your attention is bouncing every 2 seconds? Or do you mean distractibility as in you, Missy, are supposed to be paying attention to what I'm saying and your attention is jumping to a thought that's connected to your special interest?
Oh, great. No, I'm thinking more of the distractibility where a sound comes into play when I'm in the middle of
Mm,
perhaps a conversation or a focused moment, and I just cannot. My mind is
yes,
like, what is that sound? I cannot get back to this. There's something disturbing
yes,
from the outside.
yes. Yeah.
So which
So
that is different in what way? Yeah.
I interpret that as that is a sensory processing thing. That is a sounds are coming into your brain. They're coming through your ears. They're going into your brain. They're being interpreted and they're not integrating. So this is the situation where like I either hear everything or I hear nothing. Like I can
Mm.
cancel everything out, in which case people will call my name and I won't respond, or I will hear everything and it will distract me, which is why I have earplugs. So, and that to me is a processing thing, which points to potentially more of the autism picture than the in addition to, but then there's within all of these different categories, there's sensory processing difference. Um, this is where the categories actually can be interesting because it might be that you're distracted because you hear differently. And if you go take a hearing test,
Hmm.
it might be a hearing issue as opposed to an autism brain processing difference. So it needs
And,
a lot of unplugging. Sorry.
and there's, my diagnosis first came because one of the questions my counselor asked me, do the tags on your clothes
Yes,
distract you? And I was like, that's a
me
thing.
too. Yeah,
Like, "Whoa," and I was also anyway, so there's
I know.
like sensitivity to different things. I'm finding that there's
Yes,
less of a so and Katie, this is how I've started thinking about it is the sensitivities of not being
yes,
like a quote neurotypical brain sorts information out, is able to cut
yes,
things out
precisely.
so that we can focus, and that our brains don't do that. And like
Yes.
that slide, there's some really positive things about that.
Mhm.
But when I learned that that's actually I have sensitivities here
Yeah.
that I'm not able to sort out. So things such as doing earplugs, my daughter learning to put a cap and headphones in to
Yeah.
do shopping, all the anxiety went away. To
And
just start getting, figuring out which environments I thrive in versus
yes.
something wrong with me.
Yeah. And
And
some people don't need to know more than just this is a sensitivity I have. Not
yeah,
everyone needs to know which category it goes in.
right. And I'm not even that jammed with the diagnosis, other than this is a cluster of patterns. How do we
Yeah.
respond to
Yeah.
because
Cluster of patterns.
because of how much pathological, like you're broken, everybody's feeling bad. I mean, it's already in that diagnostic pathological mode. And
Mhm.
so, yeah.
And pattern recognition is a neurodivergent superpower typically.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? What thoughts or insights are coming up? I'm seeing people nod. Yeah, I just saw a hand go up oh, Rebecca, please.
Yeah, hi. I think maybe this is more a thought or a comment and see if anyone or Katie can speak to it. So I was thinking about that significant distress and having issues in life as a diagnostic criteria. And I'm thinking like how about neurodivergent people who have great support and resources? And say for that person, they may not experience as much distress or issues in life um, in comparison to another um, neurodivergent person who, who knows, may have fewer sensitivities or things, but less resources and support. And then they may get the diagnosis instead of the former neurodivergent person.
Yes. Great, great point. And there's also the question of what does significant distress look like? I was having a conversation with somebody really recently where I was saying just because they weren't in a full-on meltdown didn't mean they weren't in significant distress. All the words they were using, and I run into this all the time where there's, um, I'm either like this or I'm in a complete meltdown. I either look like I'm not in distress, even if I'm in distress, or I'm in such a meltdown I can't talk. And there's a big group of us who aren't going to look like we're in distress. We're going to tell you we're in distress, or we're going to stop eating and stop sleeping and end up in fights with people. But it doesn't look like significant distress. So, this whole concept of what is significant distress is very much about how it's perceived, as well as you were saying, um, it's when looking at something like ADHD or autism, you're looking at patterns over hopefully like 20 years. So there's this detective work of when someone's sitting down next to you, maybe you're not in significant distress now, but if you start digging, and sometimes you have to get people to disclose things they really don't want to because they're ashamed. You're like, tell me all your secrets so that I can see that you're in distress in the past, if not now. Um, but it's really, really hard to diagnose this stuff or to see this stuff, which is why it can be so hard to live with it or to get help for it or to study it.
Thank you.
One question I have is how does masking look in for people with ADHD? Because I've been obviously reading a lot about how it looks for people with autism, but I'm just curious, like, as you briefly mentioned how it can show up for people with ADHD. I'm curious if you can give me more specifics on
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. So masking, if we look at the idea of appearing neurotypical, let's see, what are the things I've done recently? I have going and having a drink in your hand all the time that you can fiddle with, whether it's alcohol or water. Having rings you can fidget with. Having, for me, I would take notes in school all the time. It's movement. I would pay attention. I cared about my teachers. So I would take notes, and that was hyperactivity, and it was socially accepted. Um, I'm on mute typically on calls because I'm so impulsive. I talk unless I'm on mute and I have to pause to unmute myself. Um, it can also look like keeping in check any exuberant behaviors because they make other people uncomfortable. It can look like cleaning. A lot of the like 50-plus-year-old women that I know who are masking are cleaning all the time, or they're on the go all the time, or they're, um, I also know a lot of folks who will mask by watching sports. They're socially uncomfortable and they're interested in sports, and they just go watch sports with their guy friends and talk about the sports. So, like, it's less the behavior you're looking at and more what is the behavior covering.
That's helpful. Other questions?
Oh, rehearsing scripts. That's a good one too. If you're rehearsing scripts of
Yeah.
like, how do I talk about this? How do I keep this behavior in check? How do I make sure I have X, Y, and Z in place so that I can exist within this box that either society or a relationship or a society believes I should exist within. And sometimes we need to. It just might be that if you're always in that box, you got a problem.
Other questions, comments? Mary Ellen?
Yeah, turn the light on so you can sort of see me. There we go. Um, First of all, Katie, your information was stellar. Thank you. I really well organized, and I got a lot. Um, I have a couple of people in my I think I'm kind of one of those people that's probably more in the middle and more neurotypical. Um, but I have one friend in particular and a family member in particular who clearly have the challenges you're talking about. And my friend, who I've known for 30 years, I mentioned to him, um, have you ever looked at perhaps that you're on the spectrum? And he initially received it politely, which I think was masking. And then not all that long later, I got a scathing email from him just ripping me up for being
Sorry.
judgmental when I was about as
Oh,
far from
Lord.
that as possible. But yeah, I
Mhm.
realized I stepped on a landmine there. Um,
I'm
um,
sorry.
and I
I've
did it
done that.
from and I did it from
I know.
the most loving place as a friend, but it certainly landed badly. But I think some of that, what you mentioned, was about this thing about hyper hyper responsive to rejection, or I don't get the
Yeah.
remember the exact words, but if you could speak to that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Lord. I've been on both sides of this.
Yeah.
I've been on both sides of this. So it's it can be really tricky to be someone who's hyper reactive, and it can be really tricky to live with, love, or care about, and be in friendships with people who are overreactive, or like hyper reactive,
Mm-hmm.
because we just go off like on hair trigger reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like, was your question how to be in relationship with somebody who's kind of
Yeah, well,
overreacting?
because I ended up backpedaling pretty
Yeah.
quick because I realized this is one of those things where I could either be right or I could create peace. So we chose peace. Um, but my other challenge is that my brother is clearly neurodivergent,
Yeah.
never diagnosed, never had any support, um, doesn't speak to me because finally things just, and so there's no relationship there at all. I have understanding of what his situation is now,
Yeah.
but I feel like the only thing that my best response, if he ever does speak to me again, is never to mention this neurodivergence, but just understand and give him grace and space. And because at the age of 67, when he's not curious,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
not a lot of there's not a lot there.
I think there's a couple things here. The first one is my husband has taught me the value of a good apology.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
You know, um, just a completely well-intentioned, meaningful, I'm really sorry, I overstepped, or I said something that was out of line. I didn't mean it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. Like, one, just a good apology helps.
Mm-hmm.
And asking if somebody's open to some thoughts sometimes helps, of, hey, like, I've been learning about X, Y, and Z, and I'm seeing it in a variety of places. Are you open to talking? Your version of it might be feeling somebody out on a conversation before approaching them with, I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing this in you.
Mm-hmm.
But getting a feel for where they are before maybe having the conversation, and then asking for consent before having it. Because, as someone in the chat just said, um, you never know where someone's going to come down when it comes to labels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is so much stigma about this, and there is so much, um, what does this mean? So
Yeah.
it may be that you
Yeah.
just start talking about it if you're interested in it and they're around, and they might get interested in it, or you
Mm-hmm.
just don't talk about it. I don't know. It's so specific to who you are and who you're talking about. But I think I've learned not to walk around pointing this shit out to people. When I'm
Right.
at the dog park. I watched a friend at the dog park actually straight up do what you just did. And I was
Yeah.
just like, oh, landmines, you know?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Ugh.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it really is it's like the understanding the patterns of behavior is extremely liberating, and it gives us something to do. There's like a way of responding, of communicating, of creating a life that is more benign for those of us that are walking around with sensitivities. And
Yeah.
when Mary Blackburn diagnosed me, I burst out crying.
Yeah.
And my what burst out of my mouth was, I thought it was because I smoked too much pot. It was just like, I was like so embarrassed and just like, it just out of my mouth.
Yeah.
I'm noticing, even though I'm in this realm and have been a lot more, which is one of the reasons why I invited you and said, please come talk, how emotional I'm feeling just getting the information in. Because there's a lot of information here. And so for those of you that are just, you just had a ton, and, many of you most likely are sensitive. And so for me, that's the place where, what can you take from this talk and this information that will help you have a more comfortable existence? with those of you and the people around you who don't understand. So for me, it gives me an increased ability to be compassionate with myself and to start interrupting the places that of my programming that there's something wrong with me. Because we got those messages, honey, I love you to pieces. We just don't know where you came from. How many times in my life have I been called weird? Lots. My granddaughter called me weird recently, and I was like, sweetheart, it's been said before and it'll be said again. And so I'm starting to just get more comfortable, but I'm also 65. And so I'm wondering, Katie, as we're coming towards the end here, some tools, some practices, some guidance for where people can go in addition to contacting you because you're such a resource.
I think also want to say I opened a can of worms. I don't like leaving people with an open can of worms and no ability to contact me. So yes, please, you can contact me. We can talk about it if something came up, or if you have questions, feel free. And I think information is a big, big piece of this, but it also requires digesting. So, however you want to digest, whether it's writing or dancing or walking, giving yourself space and time. But it's also okay if you're overwhelmed and need to distract. I think distraction can be a tool if you're overstimulated or if you're overwhelmed. So, over the next week, maybe have some space for processing, but also have some space to just engage in things that you enjoy and let this information unfold however it unfolds. Um, that's one piece. And as someone just put in the chat, watching people who are in the community through YouTube.
Well, oh,
Go ahead.
well, like it was commenting, like someone said, yeah, that was like in response to Jonah's comment about Astrid on
I got
PBS, and I
distracted.
was saying, yeah, that was in the like that kind of I had the same experience as that too.
Thank you. I think mindfulness is really useful as a way to integrate and to practice slowing down. It also, mindfulness as in be aware of what you're doing while you do it. You don't have to be sitting still. So if you want to go on a bike and be mindful, if you want to be mindful while you cook, doesn't matter. I think recognizing that you are a unique being with a different nervous system and a different brain than anyone who's ever been born, and that you are on a journey to unfold that. And the people who are around you are on that journey with you. And we're all doing the best that we can while learning and trying to be the best people and community members that we can. So, talking with each other or talking with your community about what you're learning, and about how you're processing it, as well as talking with yourself, whether that's journaling, as I was saying, or dancing, or and letting yourself be present with the material when you can, and distracting if it's getting too overwhelming. And I think also noticing where your patterns are that are problematic behaviors. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, um, where do you reach? Do you reach for the chocolate? Do you reach for the marijuana? Do you reach for the video games? And noticing as much as you can where that is, and if it's connected to any of these patterns.
Got it. Yeah, no blame and get company. This is a drum that I beat with all of my clients. Do your best to not solo function, and also uh, getting company in a way that works. So side by side play for me sometimes is more comfortable than having people really intensely interacting, you know? And so there's a bunch of different things. And I'll be bringing in some more tools about how to be self-employed, entrepreneurial with neurodivergence in August. So the next free masterclass is
Yeah.
August 7th. And you guys will all get notifications for that. Oh, and yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. It's wonderful. So I'm going to pause the recording and just, yeah. Okay.